Hello, my name is Lori Gill. I'm the founder and clinical director at the Attachment and Trauma Treatment Center for Healing. One of the questions we get quite often is about trauma-focused therapy. So we use our own trauma-specific model of treatment called the Integrative Trauma and Attachment Treatment Model, which is an integrative model designed to work at an integrative level, hence the name, but to work with the brain, body, mind, nervous system simultaneously to promote regulation, increased embodied awareness, and reparation. So some of the ways that we do this is by layering in approaches that have been found very effective and helpful for the treatment of trauma, but we've kind of rolled them into one model in an integrative, fluid way. A lot of the times there are misconceptions around the treatment of trauma and at times thoughts that doing trauma work might actually cause harm or be dangerous. And although that certainly can be true, um, especially if things are done too fast, too broadly, or oftentimes if it's done through a traditional talk therapy model. And the reason for this is because research shows us, neuroscience research actually showing us imaging of the brain, shows that when people are recalling their trauma, right hemisphere, which is kind of more centrally involved at a basic level with our emotional felt state, embodied awareness, our emotions, our feelings, our senses. And sorry, what's happening here is not basic, but I'm giving a basic explanation of it is what I was intending to communicate. Left hemisphere is more that higher order logic, reasoning, rationalization, cause and effect. I often refer to that part of our brain as the meaning-making part of our brain. So it's the part of our brain that likes to make sense out of things, form meaning, form understanding, and help put sequence and order to things. This is also where our speech centers are. So if we come back to that hand-brain model that I've talked about in a few of our other videos, and that's on our YouTube channel and social media if you haven't viewed it. But what happens when we recall trauma or experience trauma is that right hemisphere, the body, the senses are busy and active at work. Left hemisphere, however, what the scan showed is there's actually little to no activity happening in the left hemisphere as well as in our speech centers. In fact, it was considered to be largely offline. So what that means is if we're using a more traditional talk therapy model or cognitive behavioral therapy model, which don't get me wrong, I think those are great models and they work quite well at certain times in treatment, if we have access to those higher order parts of our brain and our speech capacities, those can be quite effective. But if that higher order part of our brain has gone offline or we've flipped our lid or we're more in that sensory, embodied, somatic, experience, and that's what's busy and active at work. But our higher order part of our brain, that left hemisphere is largely offline and our speech centers are largely offline. If we're approaching treatment using a model such as CBT, which is based more on our cognitions, so that's higher order thought process, our speech, so our ability to articulate that, our reflection of, awareness of our behaviors, that's a very left hemisphere kind of predominant therapy. So our model, on the other hand, is what I would say is more right hemisphere integrating into left hemisphere. So we do a lot of work where we're trying to bilaterally stimulate the brain. And this isn't quite as complex as it sounds. So that's really what we teach in our integrative trauma and attachment treatment model training. That's, a big part of our model is focusing on bilaterally stimulating the brain to help what we're working through or experiencing in the body to be integrated and received at that higher order level as well, or to take what we know up here in our thinking brain, such as maybe I know that I'm not to blame for something that happened, but in my body continues to respond with shame or blame or guilt as though I am to blame for what happened. What the bilateral stimulation seems to do is to promote that crosstalk between hemispheres, between right and left hemisphere, which are meant to communicate with one another, but significantly impacted by trauma. So, in addition to depotentiating that trauma, right, making it so that it no longer feels like it's reoccurring right now and it's not so scary, there also seems to be an impact on memory consolidation where that trauma is being put away in proper space and time instead of feeling like it's looping constantly and alive in the present. But the other thing that seems to happen is as we're clearing out the intensity, we're clearing out space in our nervous system to be able to focus on the day to day and, things that we're experiencing and feeling now, without having the impact of our past amplifying our responses in the present to the same degree.